I'd like to preface this by saying I live a pretty straight-edge lifestyle. No drugs, no alcohol. So I'm certain that what I saw and heard last New Year's Eve wasn't the result of some hallucination or drunken stupor. It was 100% real. I live on the outskirts of a stereotypical small southern town, and a few of my friends live even further out in the boonies, accessible only by those dark, winding country backroads. One of my friends, Jake, lives with his family in one of the nicer neighborhoods in the area, which can only be reached by these backroads. Every year, his family throws a New Year's Eve party at their house, and all their friends are invited, myself included. It's always a fun time, so I'm always excited when I get the formal invitation in the mail. Given how unpredictable southern winters can be, it didn't get really cold until a few days before New Year's Eve. I remember the newly frigid air, paired with the bumpy, unkempt country roads, made for an uncomfortable ride to Jake's house. I usually don't drive with my brights on because I hate how other drivers blind me with theirs, but the sheer darkness of the narrow, winding road made it a necessity this time. The road was surrounded on both sides by dense tree lines, so even with my brights, it was hard to see where all the twists and turns were ahead. Notably, there aren't any other houses between the turnoff to the road in Jake's neighborhood, except for a lone shack that looked like it had been abandoned for years, though I could sometimes see lights on inside whenever I passed by. A few minutes into the drive, on a particularly straight section of the road, my headlights illuminated something ahead among the trees, something white against the darkness. As I got closer, I could see it was the shape of a person standing all alone on the side of the road. They weren't moving or hiding, just standing completely still with their back to the trees. It was a woman wearing a white dress or gown of some sort, completely inappropriate for the cold. I didn't turn my brights off out of caution, so I couldn't make out any specific details in the reflective glare of her white dress. As I passed her, I thanked my lucky stars that she didn't step out into the road, forcing me to stop. But then I started to wonder if maybe I should have stopped to see if she needed help. Maybe she was another guest trying to get to Jake's party. It wasn't until I looked back in my rearview mirror, in the red glare of my taillights, that I saw the woman had turned her body to follow me, still frozen in that one spot. It was definitely creepy, and in that moment, I was glad I'm not the greatest example of a good Samaritan. No way was that a fellow party guest. I arrived at the party without any further incident around 8 p.m., parking in the gravel circle among the dozen or so other cars outside Jake's house. The house is situated in a large clearing in the surrounding forest, just like all the other spaced-out homes in the neighborhood. The festivities went on until we watched the ball drop in New York, as well as our own time zone's clock striking midnight. After that, everyone slowly started to clear out. I stayed behind to help clean up, as I usually do, since I'm one of Jake's closer friends. By the time I left, my car was the only one left in front of the house. When I got in and started it up, I got a low tire pressure light. My car is an older model, so it didn't specify which tire was low or how many had the issue. Before I freaked out, I remembered that this always happens with my tires when the weather first turns cold after a long, warm period. I figured I'd be able to make it home okay. But before I drove off, I remembered the woman I had seen on my way there. Was she still out there? Had anyone else come across her? There was another way home, a longer route that would add about 20 minutes to my drive, but I didn't want to take it so late at night, especially with possible drunk drivers out and about. I decided to suck it up and go back the way I came. I really wish I hadn't. Not even a few minutes down that same dark back road, I could feel something was wrong with my tires. I could hear it too. It sounded like bare metal scraping against the road. Slowly, my car came to a dead stop. I muttered under my breath, "This is bad." All I could think was, did my tires fall off? Against my better judgment, I had to get out of the car to see what was wrong. Stupidly, I turned the engine off and shut the door. The car's lights turned off automatically, and I was plunged into the deep darkness of the surrounding forest. With my phone flashlight, I scanned each of my tires. My heart sank as I realized all 4 tires had been ripped to shreds, as if they'd been torn apart by the claws of some animal. I could have reasoned that if one tire had a large puncture, the bumpy road could have caused even more damage. But all 4? This was deliberate. I stood there hopelessly. No one would be out at this hour on this road, even on New Year's Eve. I'd have to call a towing service or someone to come get me. But of course, there was no cell service this deep in the boonies. Just as I was about to get back into the car, the gentle wind died down. The barren tree branches stopped swaying, and even the wildlife that was still out this time of year went silent. I froze. I had never heard such silence before. It was as if time had stopped. Then I heard the sickening sound of a twig snapping somewhere within the trees. Something was moving around. I instantly shut off my phone's flashlight, leaving me in complete darkness. The rustling of leaves on the ground continued, as if someone or something was stalking through the forest. Was it a squirrel? A deer? No. This was the type of silence prey makes when a predator is nearby. And then I heard it. "I see you!" My stomach dropped. All the air was sucked out of my body. I couldn't even scream. It was a woman's voice, soft and quiet, coming from the pitch-black darkness of the tree line, not 15 feet away. It was said without malice, which somehow made it even freakier. In that moment, all I wanted to do was curl up on the ground and die. Then I heard it again. "Can you see me?" It wasn't until the voice repeated itself that my fight or flight response kicked in, but I was disoriented standing there in the darkness. I had to turn my phone light back on if I wanted to see which direction to flee. I aimed the flashlight directly in front of me, and there, standing at the edge of the tree line, was the woman in the white gown. This time her features were visible. The gown was dirty, covered in dark stains. She was deathly pale, skinny as a rail, and her disheveled gray hair fell down to her elbows. But her face was almost indescribable, grotesque, as if she were missing half of her jaw. Yet it seemed like she was trying to grin at me. In my indecisive horror, I had the flashlight trained on her for a few moments before I hauled ass down the road back toward Jake's house. That shack I mentioned earlier was closer to my current position in the opposite direction. But what if this woman actually lived there? I don't know if that was a rational thought made in the spur of the moment, but I had no time to wonder. As I sprinted down the road, I could hear the snapping of twigs and rustling of leaves behind me. She was chasing me, but with such a massive rush of adrenaline, I was able to lose her quickly. I made it back to Jake's house, ignoring the rest of the neighborhood, and pounded on the door, pleading for someone to let me in. Jake's mom answered and quickly ushered me inside, seeing how shaken up I was. I explained everything to her, Jake, and his dad. They were sympathetic, offering to let me stay the night while they called the police and a towing service, which I gladly accepted. The police said they would search the area around the road that night and that I could come get my car and make a statement the next day. All I wanted to do for now was put that night behind me and fade into sleep in the guest bedroom. But I soon found out the night wasn't over. I woke up to the sound of a light tap on the second-story window. I looked at the digital clock on the nightstand. It was exactly 3:14 a.m. Of course, none of the windows in the room had blinds. I didn't dare look out until I heard the muffled voice from outside. The same voice saying, "I see you." The woman was still out there. She had chased me all the way here and was now throwing rocks to get my attention. If I wasn't going to look out the window before, I definitely wasn't going to now. I wasn't going to leave my spot in that bed or fall asleep until morning. When the sun rose and Jake's family woke up, the woman was gone, thankfully. I told them what else had happened, and we all looked outside together before the police showed up. In the yard near where I had heard the voice, Jake's dad found a large, rusty knife that didn't belong to the family, presumably what the woman had used to slash my tires. But that also meant she had followed my car to the party at the beginning of the night and specifically targeted me when everyone else was inside. Jake's parents called and asked the other party guests if they had seen anything suspicious the night before. One of their friends said they had seen someone in a white dress walking around outside, but thought nothing of it, since people were coming and going all night. When I gave the police my statement, I told them to check around that shack on the road, as I had a hunch the woman had something to do with it. They eventually did and updated me that they found no one living there. But there was dead, gutted wildlife sprawled all around the surrounding woods. The woman I saw was never found, which of course raises a bunch of questions. The scariest ones to me, though, are how she was able to track me down so quickly once I left the party. And if she was missing so much of her face, how was she able to pronounce those words so clearly? Despite what happened, I'll still be going to Jake's house for New Year's Eve again this year. But this time I'll make sure to carpool and take the long way around. I've spent years working in national parks, mostly maintaining trails and guiding visitors. I've also volunteered for search and rescue missions. Sometimes we'd get calls about missing hikers or lost campers, and my partner Jake and I would head out to find them. Most of the time we brought them back safely. But one night was different. It was a brutal blizzard with snow falling so thick you couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. The temperature had plummeted to well below zero, around -10 degrees Fahrenheit, and every breath felt like ice in my lungs. We got a call about a missing woman. She'd been staying in a group of scenic cabins about 2 hours away. The drive was treacherous, snow piled high on the roads, and we almost slid off a couple of times. The wind howled like the world itself was screaming at us to turn back, but we had a job to do. When we reached the cabins, the group that had called us was in chaos. They spoke in rushed whispers, their faces pale with fear. I learned they'd been taking psychedelics earlier that night. They admitted they were out of their minds, experiencing strange visions and laughter that turned into sobs. One of the women, a 28-year-old named Emily, had suddenly run outside in nothing but regular clothes and sneakers. She ignored the cold, ignored their pleas to come back. By the time they realized she was gone, she'd vanished into the storm. Jake and I tried to stay calm as we grabbed our gear. The snow was falling so fast that even a few minutes' delay could erase someone's footprints. We hoped she hadn't gone far, but outside everything looked the same. White, swirling, freezing. We each had a single flashlight and had to conserve battery life. The radio crackled with the voices of other search teams, but the signal was weak. At first we found footprints leading away from the cabin. They weren't deep, which worried me given how lightly she was dressed. The bitter wind cut through my heavy coat, and I couldn't imagine how she was surviving in just normal clothes. After a short while, the footprints ended near a patch of ice. It was as if she'd been lifted into the air. I checked the surrounding area but saw nothing but snow and darkness. Jake and I split up for a moment, searching in wide circles. The minutes turned into hours. At one point, the wind died down just enough for me to hear the crunch of something moving in the distance. I rushed toward the sound, calling her name, hoping she could still hear me. There was no answer. Instead, the storm returned, angrier than before, and I felt disoriented. Jake's voice came through the radio telling me he'd found something. I fought against the gusts to reach him. He stood by a pile of clothes half buried in the snow. Her clothes. Even her shoes were there, lying haphazardly, as if she'd tossed them off in a hurry. My heart pounded. Why would she remove her clothes in such deadly cold? A chill ran through me, deeper than anything the weather could cause. We looked at each other, fear in our eyes, and continued searching, now more desperate than ever. After exactly 3 hours and 41 minutes, though it felt like days, we finally found her. She was sitting against a large tree, completely naked, her head tilted back as if she were looking at the sky. She was barefoot, with frost clinging to her blue-tinged skin. I rushed to her side, calling her name, but there was no response. Her eyes were open, but they didn't see me. She didn't blink. She was gone. I still remember how she looked, framed by the white snow, her hair frozen in small icicles. It felt wrong to see a person like that. We tried to cover her with our jackets, but it was too late. We radioed for help, our voices breaking. Neither of us spoke much after that. We just waited for the team to come, waiting for someone to take her body away. The wind seemed to moan around us, and the trees creaked like old bones. For the next few nights, I couldn't sleep. Whenever I closed my eyes, I saw her face staring at me. I heard the storm's howl echo in my mind and felt the hopelessness of standing in that cold, trying to call someone back from death. My dreams turned into nightmares where I wandered alone in the blizzard, footprints vanishing behind me. Sometimes in those dreams, I was the one who took off my clothes and ran into the storm, not feeling the cold, not caring about anything. I questioned everything for a while after that. Was there something we missed? Why did she take off her clothes? People say that in hypothermia victims, sometimes they feel hot and stripped down, confused by the cold. But in my nightmares, it felt like something else drew her away. A silent call in the wind, a beckoning from the shadows of the trees. Work in the park continued as usual, but something changed inside me. Every time I went out, especially in the snow, I felt a twinge of unease. I carried those memories like a dark stain on my heart,